Tony, we're back again.
Did we ever leave?
No.
Doesn't feel like it.
Back with a conversation that I think is on a lot of people's minds right now. And we're going to stay in our climate change series with this one. So y'all that have been following us, we're going to keep this conversation going about once a month for a while till we run out of things to talk about, right?
Oh, we're never going to run out of things to talk about this. This is the topic that I think keeps on giving.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's not going to go away. So, and not anytime soon, at least. I actually ran across a couple of articles that were talking about how to talk to kids about climate change and what's going on around us. And especially, so here's the deal. Tony, you've known me for a long time. And by the way, guys, if you're just listening to us for the first time, I'm Marla, the Green Home Coach, and this is Tony.
I'm Tony Pratt with the Sound Room.
And we just get together once in a while to bring you interesting debates, conversations on different topics about now climate change, stuff in your house, etc., and how we can have healthier and more comfortable homes, lives, and all that good stuff, right?
And conversations.
And conversation. Living green or sustainably is about more than saving on your electric bill and doing your part to protect natural resources. It is about a safer and healthier life for you and your family without sacrificing style, quality, or budget. This is a movement to provide all of us with clean air to breathe and water to drink, safe, healthy food to eat, and places to live, and energy to run the places where we live, learn, play, and work. The Everyday Green Home Podcast helps you get the value of green for you, your family, and your community. Whether it's green homes, green living, or the people who make it happen, join me, Marla Esser Close, to learn how green and sustainability practices and products work for you and our world. So at any rate, I ran across these articles, 2 of them to be specific, about how to talk to kids about climate change and what's going on. And right now, my kids are grown. And so not really having this conversation with them. And actually, we have a lot of conversations because both of my kids work in an industry that has a take on sustainability, et cetera. And because of that, we have a lot of conversations. This is part of all 3 of our lives. You don't have kids.
I do not.
So you're coming from a whole different space.
Yeah, my conversations are definitely more geared toward the adult and really more on the academic side of this whole discussion.
Right. And this is one of the things that I love about our conversations, Tony, is that you bring what you have learned and so much of the studies that you have pursued and the knowledge that you've gained, and you bring that to our conversations. And mine tends to be more the things I'm reading in cultural news, different people I follow, what's happening experientially. So I do love that complement of what we've been able to bring. And it's gotten interesting with this whole conversation with climate change because we don't always see eye to eye.
No, we don't. And, part of that is just because we do live in different worlds as far as this part of the topic. But I think that's what gives it the balance.
Oh, I agree.
I think, the minute one of us goes too far to the one direction, the other person has a counterpoint there to kind of bring it back in balance. So it's a natural scale.
And that's probably the one thing I think the undertone I read in the couple articles that we're going to kind of work through today is that balance is important.
Oh, it absolutely is.
Just like everything else. It's not just climate change. I mean, we've had the same conversations happening around COVID, and there's any big topic that comes up that's very encompassing is going to be subject to a lot of these same ideas. And a lot of people going, gosh, should I have a child with so much going on in the world, with all this climate crisis and the political strife? And I remember saying this to my mom, even when I was having kids. And she said, she's a World War II kiddo. And she said, we said the same thing back in the 60s. There's all this strife going on. There's Vietnam and all this other stuff. Should we be having kids? So I think this is a conversation that a lot of generations have. We see what's happening and we wonder. But I think bringing new life into this world is important. And I think bringing new life brings hope and future solutions that we may not even have dreamed about.
Well, this is a conversation that hasn't just been going on for generations. I mean, you're talking a conversation that most likely has been going on for millennia. I mean, pretty sure the Egyptians had this conversation when they were building pyramids. I'm pretty sure the Babylonians were having this conversation when they were building the Hanging Gardens. The Romans, the Greeks, you name it. Every great empire during history most likely had people having the same conversation, because society and civilization has always been built on internal and external strife.
One thing I think I totally agree with that, but I think one thing that might have given a different edge to the conversation is that we have a better, and I'm not sure if it's good or bad, so no judgment there, but we have a better quote unquote control over our reproductive rights and our abilities. And because of that, we have many more women choosing and families, couples choosing when they start a family. And, not 100%, but I'm going to guess much higher rates than historically in, ancient times or hundreds of years ago. So that part has lent an interesting aspect to the conversation. So I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole too deep.
Yeah, I mean, that is a great point, because we can better plan today for having or not having, or, whatever the case may be, the next generation. And that is individual decisions and individual discussions. And those are really not part of this show.
So for the context of this show, we're going to talk about our kids collectively as a society. How's that?
Society's kids. There you go.
Society's kids. And boy, they've, been a rough year for our kids.
Yeah, I mean, I really feel bad for them, because they lose out so much, not just the classroom learning. Yeah, you can get some of it virtually, but I really feel that whole generation, they learn so much outside the classroom, being around other kids. It's that social development that they're losing. And I think that's the biggest tragedy of all.
Yeah, I know. I was talking to a lady I know a few days ago, and she homeschools her kids. But she said, it's still so important that we get them out into doing something, whether it's a sport or, a homeschool group that collectively does things. And she said that was one of the first things she looked for when she moved here, was finding that resource.
Yeah, that was always one of my biggest, not issues, but the biggest downside I saw of homeschooling was you lose out on that network. But
there's a lot of homeschool like collectives, and I know I had some friends when I was still in St. Louis that they had it was almost like a homeschool school where they could go for extracurricular activities and for like the arts and PE. That was how they had both.
And once again, I get that. I'm not going to denigrate it at all, because I mean, that is what you got to start somewhere. But, you take that versus, my background of going to one of the big private schools that's been around since, the Mexican War. And that's a totally different network. And that's I don't want to say a handicap so much, but that could be a big hurdle to overcome. I think by losing these personal connections, it can end up slowing their development.
And then we've got this other thing where our kids as a society are on screens a lot now. I mean, even pre-COVID, they were on screens a ton. And there's a lot of conversation about, the health benefits of that mentally and socially. And so now we've got all of our learning or not all, but in many parts of the country, there's still significant learning occurring via screens or hybrid or all kinds of different experiences. And I also have to wonder how much more news and things being spread over social media that our kids have been exposed to being in lockdown in many places. So there's just all these factors coming together. And the whole topic of climate change has been so interesting during this whole pandemic lockdown and everything, because in a lot of parts of the world, things cleared up very fast. The natural environment cleared up very fast, and which in many cases was an indication that, yes, humans are impacting the world that we live in. So we hope, that we can figure out how to do this and live in symbiosis with the natural world a little better, but we'll see. There's a lot of factors at work there.
Well, I don't think either one of us disagree that, just human activity has an impact.
It has to.
Yeah, I mean, it just does. You have so many people driving a car every day, you're going to have emissions. Now, it is a fact that we drive way more miles today than we did in the 1980s. Yet, the fact is, we have less emissions today than we did in the 1980s because of the clean air. Because technology gets better. We understand that. So, as a society, are we going to stop all emissions? Probably not. However, we can do things to lessen the impact.
And this was one of the key things in both of the articles was actions.
No, well, that's a big one.
Taking actions and talking about what actions we're taking.
Yeah. I mean, here's the thing. How many times have you and I had the discussion of, all these great things we have today, really 19th century technology. We're in the 21st century. Things got to evolve.
They will.
They just do. That's what happens.
Yep.
I mean, how many manufacturers now have talked about eliminating the internal combustion engine?
And look how many people have now signed up to do it. How many companies are now?
Everyone is doing it. Everyone is coming out with electric vehicles. And a lot of them have pledged after a certain date, we are not going to be manufacturing internal combustion engines anymore.
Now, gasoline is not going to go away at the drop of a hat because we're going to have a lot of cars still on the roads that have been around. I mean, come on, you see that really cool antique car going down the street. That's still going to require gasoline.
They are. But luckily, those things aren't driven a lot.
Right. But we're also, if we're going to be driving a much larger number of electric vehicles, we have to figure out how to fill that need for electricity.
Yes.
Without creating more unintended consequences, without creating more emissions, without creating more fuel burnage, et cetera. So this is why it takes many solutions. And this is a great thing to discuss with people is there's many ingenious people working on this, but everybody can do their part. One of the things I loved, and you and I talked about this in our last climate change conversation, is break the silence, talk about it, get it out on the table. And that goes with adults, not just kids. And oh my gosh, I love this quote that was in the NPR article. It was, we seem to be more scared of upsetting the conversation than we are scared of climate change.
Everybody is scared of having conversations on difficult topics because nobody wants to offend others and nobody wants to feel they're wrong. Those are the two biggest things. I think especially when you are having a conversation with younger adults, children, you have to maintain positive attitudes about everything. You have to show that, hey, this is not a scary thing. This is a challenge. We have always faced challenges in, the history of society and civilization itself. It's just another challenge. That's how it works.
Well, and this is where giving the facts, and this is one of the other points, give the basic facts. There are facts of what is happening with our world. We have more people. We need to feed more people. As we need to feed more people, we're digging into more land, literally. We're cutting down trees. We're burning more fuel. All of these things are happening. And that's fine. That's basic facts. But I think there's also this side that people have feelings about this. And I think getting those feelings out on the table, and several of the articles I've read, not ones we're quoting today, but have also stated that's really important. And as you and I have said, having grace for each other, allowing you, so the entire reason you and I can have these conversations and share them with this bigger audience is because we both believe in grace.
Well, and you and I, even when we disagree on things, we're not sitting there going, you're an idiot. That just doesn't happen. It's, okay, here's my point. Here's why. It's never just well, here's the point. It's a why. Why do we believe this? This is why, I believe this, and this is why you believe that. We can articulate the argument. We can articulate the reason behind it. And I think right now, probably because they're still children, their brains are going to be developing for another, 15, 20 years.
And they see the disagreement, not the grace sometimes.
They see the disagreements. They don't understand the disagreement. They're just told, well, so-and-so says this. And that scared me. But they don't get the counterpoint, maybe. They don't get both sides of the argument.
Right. It's like a child seeing parents argue over something, but not seeing the resolution. And I was listening to somebody, I think it was on a podcast, and she said, she finally sat her kids down and said, I know when you go to bed that you hear me and daddy, having a very, involved conversation or maybe even an argument. But what you don't hear is what we come up with and how we resolve it once you've gone to bed. And I thought that was such an interesting perspective, because a lot of times our conversations are, the kids only hear part of it. And I think that's part of what's happening with this whole conversation about climate change, is they're only hearing part of it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I agree at 100% with that statement. I think.
And yes, it's scary, but the Cookie Monster might be scary too. And it's important that we help kids face their fears. I mean, just like we do with everything else, it's important that we communicate to them what's happening. We've always raised our kids to that where we were pretty transparent with them. I mean, we tempered what we said. We didn't give them the adult version, but we didn't believe that we should be hiding stuff, that they needed to have it. I mean, I had a couple of people, we had a lot of older people in our family when the kids were little. And I think they went to their first funeral when they were 3. And have all these people telling me, oh my gosh, you took them to a funeral. Well, people die. And I didn't want them to be scared of that. And they weren't. And they aren't.
You just said the magic word, though, again, and it's a running theme through this whole series, transparent. Unfortunately, I think the information that people are telling kids, well, there's no transparency on that information. So we don't know where it's coming from. We don't know what's behind it. And because we can't get on a universally accepted message to give the kids, it sets up this whole world of confusion for them.
Yeah. I mean, that's happening with a lot of adults.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's not just on the whole climate issue. I mean, we've seen it with COVID and masking and vaccines and other issues, elections. And I mean, I guess.
Pick your topic.
Yeah. A lot of stuff that's been in our lives the last year and 2 years. And I think it's so important that if a kid sees a doom, or anybody, kid or adult, sees a doomsday version, that we also talk about what we do to not have a doomsday version, or what could an alternative reality look like. And again, this whole idea of action to get there, I think that is so important. And this is something you and I have talked about since we started this podcast, is here's how you can take action.
Well, and for me, I think you just got to take the fringe sides out of the equation. And you just have to sit there and say, I'm trying to be very diplomatic.
It's like an Olympic scoring. Don't they lose the top and the bottom score and then average them?
Yeah. Yes, that is exactly how it used to be. I don't know if they still do it, but that's how it always was.
I don't know either.
Because you always had, if you were a Western athlete, you had the Eastern Bloc judge that was going to, throw you the low score. And if you were an Eastern European, you had a Western European. Oh yeah, too much politics. Politics and everything. It's always been that way. But you have to take those fringe ideas out of the equation and focus on what can be. Positive spins, positive thoughts. We have to get out of the problem-based mindset and enter into and start teaching kids more of a solution-based mindset.
And this is something you and I have, this is something we are in adamant agreement on.
Oh, absolutely.
Always put the problem in front of us, not between us. And these 2 articles, this whole idea of taking action was huge. And I totally agree with that. And the second thing that was universal, not just in these articles, but others that I've read, is hope. We have to create or continue hope. I mean, that goes right along with grace, right?
You can't just sit there and talk about doom and gloom, because that becomes the foundation for somebody's belief at that point.
And solutions are hope, right?
But if it's all doom and gloom, well, if it's going to be that anyway, why bother? Why put forth the energy and the effort to come up with an outside the box solution or have an actual discussion with somebody that might be productive to solving an issue if it's just going to be doom and gloom anyway?
Yes.
So hope is a huge part of the equation.
It is. And we've referenced Katherine Hayhoe's work several times on the show. And she is a climate scientist. And she also talks to a lot of different groups. And one of the things I love about the way she delivers her message is that she always talks about, here's the problem, here's what we can do. But she talks to people to get them engaged. And she knows the science up and down. She is a scientist. But she also feels that one of the primary things that she can do is talk to people and help them get in the conversation. Because when you're in the conversation, you're a lot more likely to do something about it. And that's the take action. And that's where hope comes from, right?
Well, it's like anything else. If you're vested in the solution, you're going to put forth some effort, right? I mean, if you're vested in anything, you're going to put forth effort. We all got to have skin in the game.
Right. So I think giving kids something useful to do. I loved one of the suggestions in one of the articles was get outdoors. Mm-hmm. Because the more we understand that we have this connection with the outdoors, I think the more that helps us to relate.
Well, I think not only that too, you take them outdoors a lot and you're constantly out there and you see it's a bright, vibrant environment. It's not a doom and gloom atmosphere.
That's true.
And I think by spending time outdoors on a sunny day, breeze blowing, you hear the birds, you see the water running, connecting with nature, you understand that it's worth fighting for. It's a positive experience. The more positive experiences you give the child, the more equipped they are able to handle the doom and gloom.
So this other article also said, watch your language.
Mm-hmm.
And that relates so much to the doom and gloom. If all your language is just the really awful stuff, that's what is going to stick. And
absolutely, it's
hard, no matter how much you understand how we can improve, fix, whatever you want to call it, things. I'm not sure there's any fix, quote unquote. But how we talk about it, I mean, our words do create reality. And oh my gosh, I've seen that happen so many times. I mean, this podcast is a bunch of words, but it's now a podcast and it's in reality because we speak words.
Well, they talk about negative feedback, especially in the business world. For every negative response you get, it takes 20 positive responses to equal it out, to balance the scale? I mean, so if all you are doing is throwing out negative responses, negative feedback, there is no hope of any positive message going into that person. So yes, words do matter. Words are key in these discussions because while you or I, we throw out a word that we don't necessarily mean maybe, well, you or I brush it off because we're far enough down the rabbit hole here in our discussions that we get it. But an 8-10-year-old child, not so much. That's going to stick.
And it's, even working with college age students, which I've been doing some with this one project.
Oh, yeah.
There's still a little bit of tunnel vision because they haven't completely lived out in the world yet.
There's that, plus there's a lack of diversity of thought.
Yeah, that's true.
They're no longer exposed to every side in a discussion. They only see a couple. And I don't know if it's by choice.
Well, hopefully they're getting to discuss lots of sides. That's what you're supposed to do in college.
That's what you're supposed to do. But come on, you read the news stories. I read the news stories. I see what's going on college campuses. It's no longer a place for experience and discussion. It's this is what it is.
So I think the advice that we see and we read for how to talk with kids about this is pretty good advice for how to talk to anybody about this.
Oh, I agree.
And I think the most important thing is to get it out on the table, just to talk about it. So it's not verboten. And that means sometimes you may have to choke down your own feelings a little bit just to get it down to the kids' level and have this conversation and listen to them. There are so many times that I think we have all the answers before we know what the questions are. And I find that, kids are very forthcoming about that, but I think it happens with all of us.
I think the other thing we have to really focus on is feeding the information in bits and pieces, because this is, especially with this topic, this is a very complex topic. There are a lot of moving parts and pieces. So many moving parts and pieces that a lot of adults have problems understanding the full breadth and scope of the conversation.
Yep. There is almost nothing we touch or do that isn't affected.
No. And what you need to do is really start with what you easily understand. What is easily explainable to kids, And
helping the kids to have some easy, straightforward things they can do where they feel they're taking some action. They're getting to do something. And that's, back in the days when I was career coaching, back in another life, one of the very first things, I worked with people who had been laid off. And one of the very first things I would always suggest to them is go volunteer somewhere.
Oh, yeah.
And for two reasons. One, it got you up doing something. And a body in motion stays in motion, right? But two, I would tell them, hey, you never know who you're going to run into.
No, that's true.
But I always have, everybody I've talked to has felt better when they are doing something to help something or somebody else. And honestly, we've said this before, this conversation comes down to how well us people are going to come through whatever is going on. It's really all about people, but people got to be somewhere. So.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I like your analogy. There is something about social inertia.
Yes.
And keeps, just as a society, you can even throw out societal inertia, right? Society as it moves forward.
And I think that's what we're trying to build right now is some societal inertia.
Yeah, as society continues to move forward, it stays moving forward. The minute it stops, when it grinds to a halt, why does it grind to a halt? Because two sides dig in and nobody wants to compromise. Nobody wants to agree. It's my way or the highway. And the minute that happens, object at rest, tendency to stay at rest, right?
Yep.
Whereas if we're having the conversations and they're productive conversations, we can continue to move forward and we can keep moving forward.
So, break the silence, talk about it, give the basic facts, focus on feelings, get them out, take some action, like getting outside, watch your language, and find hope. So, with saying all that, and as a person who does not have kids, give me 3 actions you could imagine for kids.
Ooh, this is a good one. How long do we have?
You want me to pause this?
You might have to. So I would think the first thing, I would take them on a hike. Take them on a hike, go to a park, wherever, and while you're hiking, pick up trash.
Good idea.
Help clean up the environment that you're being in touch with. Because let's face it, you walk along, you're going to see stuff. I used to do that all the time when we go floating. See some trash floating by, you grab it, throw it in the canoe, and we'll dispose of it later.
Okay, there's one.
Let's see, that'd be number 1. This is tough because, I really don't know what you do with kids.
Well, I have one, and I took my kids to volunteer. We did that frequently. But for instance, taking the kids to a community garden where they could maybe work alongside other people in a community garden environment, or starting a garden and actually creating food. So that would be one idea I would have. I just felt volunteering was such a big part of the kids' life for them to be a part of giving. And both of them did Scouts for a little while. So we would have different projects in the community through Scouts. But that helped for them to see things.
So just for full disclosure, everybody should know I am the only sibling in my family. Plus, I have no children.
I couldn't have picked a farther out one.
Oh, yes. You've got that right. There are no kids in my family in this market.
But that's okay because you're giving the other extreme of what you see. And I'm a mom and I'm going to be a grandmom soon. So I have a different perspective.
Yeah, really outside of going on a hike, I got nothing. The other thing, any kind of an outdoor activity, teach them to fish, teach them to canoe, teach them just something that gets them out into nature and connects with nature. And fishing, it could be catch and release. It could be whatever, just understanding. Or it could be literally catching dinner. I heard a stat that for every generation that loses connectivity with the outdoors, it takes 2 to reconnect it.
Wow. So maybe an adult bicycles or walks to school with the kids. Get out of the habit of getting in the car for everything. Maybe you go to a farmer's market, or better yet, go to a farm. See how your food is grown. Pick it. You've got all these picking where you go pick your own food.
Yeah, you've got the apple orchards you could go visit. You've got pumpkin patches you could go
Those
visit.
are getting a little commercialized, but I got your meaning.
Part of that's just because of everything going on last year or so.
And I think, a big part of what my teaching has shifted to is helping people to connect that our personal health is really tied to the health of this great big world we live on. And our homes are part of that. And what we do in our homes can affect not only us personally, but the bigger world and vice versa. So maybe there's some little things around the home that you can get the kids involved with. Teaching them not to waste is a big part, just teaching them how to use stuff wisely. Yeah.
Well, right out of the bat, you should always teach them how to recycle.
Turn the water off when you're brushing your teeth.
Yes, things like that. But more importantly, it's the mindset of, well, do you necessarily need to go buy something new?
So, and I think this is an opportunity to talk about why that's important. So, why do we turn off the water when we brush our teeth? To make sure there's enough water to go around. And so we get to help make sure everybody has enough water by not using too much on our own. So little things like that, I think, can help tie it together. We are, as a society, pretty disconnected, and educating our kids, disconnecting what we do with what happens. Sorry, I didn't finish my sentence. So teaching our kids how to connect those dots, I think, can go a long way about helping them to understand. And we've seen this kind of with some of the younger generations that are young adults now, is that they will, for instance, support companies that have their same values or that are practicing sustainability and good employee practices and things of that nature. But yet a lot of this same generation won't recycle or won't turn off the lights or do simple things. Ooh, there's a good one. Turn off the lights.
Oh, yeah, when you're not in the room.
Yeah. So they're much more inclined, this particular generation is much more inclined to buy their way into quote unquote compliance or better or whatever you want to call it, rather than what they actually do. Whereas like baby boomers are big doers. They tend to be more involved in actual action. So there's some interesting demographic research about how you talk to different demographics to get them engaged. And that's way beyond the scope of this conversation. But I think the more we connect the dots with, especially with our kids, this is good.
Well, if you want to go the route of trying to connect dots and all that, I think you should pick topics or pick habits that they wouldn't necessarily think about in your location. So like St. Louis, let's throw this out there. Who really worries about water conservation in St. Louis?
Yeah, y'all got too much.
Exactly, right.
And here we don't.
We do not get droughts because we have the confluence. We have more water in the ground in St. Louis than anywhere.
But there have been times when the rivers have been very low.
They're low, but it doesn't mean we don't have water. We've got plenty of water here because there's water in the ground. That means it rains. We get more rainfall than Seattle, and Seattle's in a rainforest. That's just the way it is. If you've never been to St. Louis, it's a treat when you have a 3-day-long rainstorm with driving, pouring, deluge of water. That's what we get. Anyway, nobody thinks about water conservation in St. Louis just because it's all over. However, what has the biggest impact? Something like that. Yes, you should turn the water off when you're brushing your teeth. Why? Because even though we have it, doesn't mean we should be wasteful.
Yeah, that's probably one of the best actions we can do, is just help the kids learn how not to waste. Just use what they need. I've seen a number of different conversations about if we just cut the waste out of certain processes, we could have enough resources freed up to improve things in many different cases. And there's several recent occurrences of this, but the waste is a big issue. And we're a pretty wasteful society here in the US, unfortunately. We just have enough, so we don't think about it, which is lovely.
We don't think about it.
Yeah, but it's not equitable, and that's down a whole nother rabbit hole. But so anyway, so yes, I agree. Teaching the kids. Yeah, I know we're about ready to wrap up, so we're not going to go that way.
Well, you want another hour of this?
So I think that's some great ideas. I love the fact that we're going to tackle this, talking about this, taking action, and working on this as an ongoing conversation from different angles. I would love input from our listeners, you mighty listeners out there, on some topics that you'd like us to bring up. We have a lot of ideas, but I would really like to hear from you. And we'll do the research. So just give us the topic and we'll dive in.
Or we'll just shoot from the hip like we usually do. Oh, wait, that's me.
Yeah, but I've done some research. I do research before I get on, and you, my gosh, you're in every class all the time. So there you go. So create action, create hope, talk about it. Don't be scared to have feelings about it. There you go. Ha ha, that sounded simple, didn't it?
Be positive.
Not so much. Well, Tony, listeners, thank you very much. The conversation continues. Catch you next time.
See you, Marla.
That wraps this episode of the Everyday Green Home Podcast. Get the show notes with all the resources mentioned in this episode. And be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. Ready to get started? Get more information, how-tos, and resources in my private Facebook group, Love Your Everyday Green Home. See you there. And remember that living a little better and a little greener is easier than you think.